Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich talks with community leaders about issues in the public safety arena, sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.
This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff's Report. Good morning. For those of you listening on the radio, good afternoon. The thing that we're going to talk about today is training. And an article that was done by the Spokane Review over the weekend concerning Sheriff's Office training and a proposal that we're submitting to the State of Washington's Training Commission this week. The title of the article for the spokesman was, Knezovich wants to shorten training. I'm not quite sure when the media is ever going to get off the negative side of their portrayal of law enforcement, but hopefully someday they will. Because this is not shortening law enforcement training. Actually, we're adding more hours to the training. That's at least one of the things that's pointed out in the story. However, as I've mentioned many times to you over the last few weeks, last few months, maybe even the last few years, the media uses hooks, titles that really don't reflect the true nature of the story to hook your interest. And then the first few paragraphs of that story may be angled a little bit more on the controversial side just to get your interest. And the sad part is, folks, as we as Americans, as we read the news, we tend to only look at the headline, and if we get past 3 paragraphs, we're lucky. And here's the danger in doing that. Over the last several months, you've heard of several police shootings or officer-involved deaths, but you're not getting the full story on those, and you're not. Let's take the Breonna Taylor out of Louisville, Kentucky situation. It took me reading 10 separate articles, and you have to read them all the way through because generally the facts are based at the end to find out and piece together exactly what happened down in Louisville. And it's not exactly the way it's being portrayed today. So next week, maybe, next couple of weeks, we'll talk about some of these other issues because it's the same thing that happened in Ferguson back in 2014. They told you all this stuff, supposedly, that happened in Ferguson. You remember, hands up, don't shoot? That didn't happen. It did not happen. But there is a majority of Americans that believe that today. And it's because you were never told the accurate facts of that particular situation. So when we talk about stories, when we talk about what's going on, you have to really do your research. And for the Sheriff's Office, we've come up with a different philosophy on how to reach out to you, the citizen. This is one of them. The other one is our Facebook page, because I'm going to be trying to do weekly 10 to 15 minute discussions on topics through our Facebook, so you can understand what's truly going on rather than the spin that is being put on things. So let's talk about Sheriff's Office training. The one thing I want you to understand about this is we have a lot of support in the state of Washington. We have a lot of agencies looking at what we're doing. As a matter of fact, my training director came back from a trip to Southwest Washington and met with several of the agencies there that are very interested in this proposal because they're really frustrated with the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. One, the training isn't standardized. Two, they're no longer an accredited agency. Three, they keep canceling academies, or telling us they're going to cancel academies, or they can't keep up with the flow of work that needs to be done to train law enforcement officers. So many of us are looking at ways to improve that training, to make sure that it is standardized, to become accredited, so you have faith and confidence that the training that your law enforcement officers are being provided is the best there is. And we've been involved in this for a very long time. I've been involved in the training issues in the state of Washington even before I became sheriff. I sat on what used to be the BLETC board, the Basic Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board, that was closed down during the Great Recession. I wish they'd bring it back, because that is really what drove standards. During that time, we identified that there were certain standards that weren't being met in firearms training. So I basically donated 2 of my staff for about 2 years to CJTC. We created a Master Certified Firearms program. Our agency was the first in the state to have Master Certified Firearms instructors, and we have been nursing that program ever since to make sure that we have standardized training in one of the most critical areas of law enforcement training, is the use of a firearm and when to use a firearm, and to make sure that our people are trained well in that aspect. It is one of the most heavily liability issues there is. And before, there was no standards for it. Now we have standards. We continue to push that bubble. We continue to push the bubble of trying to make sure that law enforcement training is standardized, that law enforcement training is the best that we can get. So that's what we're looking at right now. We're looking at a new integrated approach to basic law enforcement training. And when you take a look at the reason, one of the biggest reasons is we have such a demand to get people trained right now that if the state isn't fulfilling that, we cannot adequately staff the streets of our communities. So that is one of the biggest issues that we're working on. So we take a look at the next slide. Just tells you what the mandates for the state of Washington are, the RCW, all this falls under. This is a presentation that we gave to all the commissioners of the Washington Law Enforcement Training Academy, CJTC. So when we talk about what we're doing, currently CJTC training is 720 hours of basic law enforcement training. Now, it's very sequential in their stepping. You go to the academy, you get your certificate, you go through an FTO car, and then you pass the FTO car, you're on probation. The problem is, we've been finding that we send people to the academy to get that 720 hours of training, months at the academy, and sometimes when they get into the FTO car, within 2 to 3 weeks, they're resigning because they're rapidly learning that law enforcement's a little bit more challenging than they thought it was. That law enforcement is very dynamic, and you have to be able to multitask. So one of the principles that we're looking at is taking that new recruit, put them in the academy, but every Friday we're putting them in with an FTO, a field trainer, out in the car. And they talk with the FTO about the subject that they dealt with all week in the academy. So it's a building block philosophy, lay the foundation, the academics, and then they get to see it in the real world. Now, they don't get to participate in the law enforcement activities until they've actually gone through the defensive tactics training, gone through the firearms training, have enough knowledge base so they can start interacting with our citizens out on the street. And that's usually about 10 to 12 weeks into the academy. Then they start, the philosophy of, we're going to tell you how to do this, we're going to show you how to do this, and then we're going to have you do this. That's the phases they fade into in about 10 to 12 weeks. So it's not they get into the car within week one and they're able to enforce law. No, they're observing and they're talking with the FDO and they're seeing what is actually being dealt with out on the street. So the next slide is the current model. And it has a lot of wasted time. And a lot of that time is wasted because if you notice, the first 2 weeks, pre-academy, then you go to the law enforcement academy, and the first week is an administration week, and then you have 18 weeks of the main academy. You get out, we get them back, and the academy really isn't training them in all the aspects that we really need to have them trained in. So we spend another 4 weeks of post-academy getting them trained up on proper report writing and everything else. And then we allow them into the FTO car for another 12 to 16 weeks. And it's in that phase that we are tending to lose recruits because they are finding that it's very challenging out there. It's a very dynamic environment out there. And these kids are, law enforcement isn't for everybody. It isn't. Not everybody can do this job. It takes a special breed of individual that can see negative on a continual basis and not have that affect them to a total detriment, because, folks, it does affect us. The things that we see affect us. They affect us. They affect our families. We do our best to identify when an officer is having a problem, a deputy is having a problem, and try to get them the help that they need. I have seen things in my career that I wish on none of you. But it is very, very challenging and is a very hard occupation to, quite frankly, survive without becoming jaded, without, quite frankly, losing your families, without ultimately losing your career. I should probably say the most ultimate, losing your life because of the things that you see on a continual basis. There's no coming back from the front for a police officer. They're on the front lines 30 years. So we have to make sure that they are trained well, and then we have to make sure that they're taken care of. And that's one of the things missing in our society right now, because they have been demonized now. So this is the current model. It takes 36 to 40 weeks. There's at least 6 weeks of this that should be able to be taken care of if we structure this better, that we won't have to have 4 weeks of post-academy. We won't have to have 2 weeks of pre-academy. So Washington's second approach is we have lateral officers from other states. Those other states have various degrees of requirements to become a police officer. CJTC, our current academy here in the state of Washington, is a 720-hour program. And that is at the top end of the national standards, because if you take a look at the next graph, you have Georgia at about 444 hours. You have the Washington State Patrol at over 1,200 hours. Our academy would be at about 1179, I believe it is. And then you have CJTC at down here in the middle at 720 hours. So we intend on increasing the hours of training, the hours of the academy, and at the same time integrate the field training car so the candidate actually gets to see what's going on. So when you take a look at what we're looking at, and I'm going to skip a few slides here, and Vinny, if you can find the one that says Spokane County Sheriff's Office Basic Training Law Enforcement Training Proposal. Most importantly, that we want the state and the citizens of our community to understand is it's not that we don't want to be part of CJTC. We actually want to be part of CJTC. We want them to authorize a 36-month training pilot program to see if this new model will work. And during that time, we've already started making arrangements to have an outside college, WSU is the one we're looking at right now, to come in, audit the entire curricula, just like they're doing for the state of Oregon. We didn't choose WSU just out of a whim. We knew that the WSU about 3 to 4 years ago started working with the state of Oregon to totally rewrite and revamp their academy. Our training academy in the state of Washington, CJTC, had the opportunity to join in that program. They chose not to. But we would like to have WSU, just like they're doing for the state of Washington, review our process, and at the end of that process, give us an evaluation and an audit of the training that we're doing. Once that's done, we intend to apply to an international law enforcement training association, IADLES, and it's a group that all of the post directors, that means the academy directors in the United States for every state belong to, and we're going to have them come in, review our training, certify the training, and accredit it, our training unit. So this isn't just one of those things that we're looking at, fly by the seat of our pants. We have a definite line out of exactly how we are going to do this, and we're bringing in outside experts to make sure that we're constructing the curricula correctly, that the curricula is based on the things that we need to have it. There's a lot of talk about bias training in law enforcement. Here's the problem with bias training in law enforcement. There's really no peer-reviewed research that it works. So that's why we're bringing in the colleges to take a look at the training we're providing in that arena to ensure that it has some kind of scientific-based research that shows that what we're training is actually proper and what we need to be training law enforcement officers in the area of race relations, in the area of bias, and all these topics that people are talking about. But the thing you need to understand about those topics, there's not 1 ounce of research behind it. It's a bunch of politicians and activists talking about, well, this is what they need. Well, okay, we're trying to design it now, and we're bringing in the experts to help us do that. So it's not that we don't want to be part of CJTC. We actually want to be part of CJTC, and at the end of the day, CJTC can use the Spokane County Academy to help augment their training, and we can actually help them provide the same type of training on the west side of the state. That was the meeting we had last week with all the agencies in Southwest Washington. They're interested in this, and they're looking at it. And quite frankly, folks, there are people nationally looking at this. They're really interested to see, can we change that dynamic? Is there a better way to train police officers? And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a better way to make sure that we are providing you with the best law enforcement professional we can find and develop. So under our training, if you take a look at the graph, you have 1 week of pre-academy, no weeks of post-academy because we've taken care of all of that within the 18 weeks. And part of the philosophy that I really forced into this philosophy, this process, was I hired one of the best curricular writers in the state of Washington. He used to work for CJTC, Tony Anderman. And I told Tony, building block philosophy, I want them to understand how to write a police report and the critical areas of a police report from day one. And that's built in. Everything they do, they write about. Everything they do, they have to develop that skill of writing a good police report. It's the most important thing that we do is document what we do it, why we did it, so it can go, and those reports ultimately can end up in the United States Supreme Court. That's how important report writing is. A lot of people who don't understand that, when you watch the shows like Cops, Live PD, well, I should say when you could watch Live PD, they show you a lot of the stuff that they do out in the field. What they didn't show was the hours upon hours of report writing that goes into being a police officer. If you take a look at the other end of the graph, 8 to 10 weeks in the field training car. Well, remember, we also have them in the training car during the 18 weeks. So what we've done is we're ensuring that we gave you the knowledge, put you out into the street, let you see how the knowledge works on the street, because the FTO has to be teamed up with the academy personnel so they know that they're rookies in week 5. That means when that rookie comes into the training car on that Friday, that FTO knows these are the subjects that they've covered in week 5, and these are the things that I need to show them in relationship to that subject matter out in the field. Unlike CJTC, we will not give a new deputy their certificate until they complete the entire training. That means the academy side and the field training side, because currently we send somebody to the state academy, they graduate after 720 hours, and they get a certificate, they are certified. They can fail an FTO car and still be a certified police officer in the state, and then go and maybe get hired by somebody else. For us, if you can't pass the entire program, which means both the academics and the field training, you're not getting a certification because you didn't meet the full requirement. To be a police officer isn't just the academic knowledge, it's also how you apply the academic knowledge out in the field, and do you have the temperament to remain wearing a badge. So during that time, we're evaluating a lot of different things in a rookie. And we will not give them their certification until they pass the entire gambit. That is one of the things that we find to be lacking in the state's approach. 720 hours and you get a certificate. No, you're going to have to meet the entire program. I'm going to skip a few of these, but one thing I do want to highlight is that CIT training, crisis intervention training, de-escalation training, in the academy you're only getting 22 hours currently. In our academy, you will receive 40 hours. That will save a lot of the agencies that do this model a lot of money, a lot of time, because currently training comes out with 22 hours. It's a state mandate that they have to have 40 hours. That means it's an added cost to their home agency to get them that training, that additional training to get them to the 40 hours. In our training, they will have that 40 hours of CIT training built in, and they will have practiced that CIT training out in the field before they ever become a certified police officer. When you compare the two timelines, yes, we are shorting things down. But again, it's because we're taking out the waste and we were building in a proper structure. And by the time those individuals come out of that training, they should be able to deal with anything that they need to out on the street, and they come out with a certificate that shows not only could you do the book work, but you could also perform out in the field. That is one of the strongest differences between the two, is that we actually are requiring them to show that they can do the skill before ever giving them a certificate. The second thing is we're taking out the waste. We're building in the proper structure, because in the current model, they're getting maybe 2 hours of report writing training. In our model, from day one, they are immersed in the report writing, and they have to write reports on everything that they do. When they go through reality-based training scenarios, they have to write reports on what they saw did, just like they would out in the field. So that is truly what we're behind the effort to revamp the training in the state of Washington. We want to bring standardized training to the state of Washington. The state of Washington says that it's rewriting its curricula. Well, they've been rewriting that curricula for years now. They spent $90,000 on rewriting curricula that they got and never used. Now they're rewriting it again, claiming that they have to do it to match the requirements under I-940. Here's the harsh reality. The requirements under I-940, very little of it applied to the basic law enforcement training. It is mostly advanced training that is required, and it is expensive advanced training that, quite frankly, I'm all for. But there is a major expense to the requirements of I-940 that a lot of people don't understand. And they also don't understand how bad I-940 has hurt the ability of law enforcement in this state to properly investigate officer-involved shootings, and the expense it has added to that arena for agencies that, like Spokane Police Department and the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, who are regional leaders. We can no longer afford to do officer-involved shootings for the entire region because those other parts of the counties or the cities, if they're involved, we can't use their personnel. And we do not have enough personnel in-house to handle all the workload anymore. So it has been a detriment. We're hoping that maybe the state will do something to help out with that. But as far as the training side, I'm all for the training. We should have that training. Folks, I hope you have a better understanding of the spokesman article now and what we are actually trying to do in the state of Washington, which is to improve the state's training, not shorten it by cutting anything, but adding better models so we are better using the time. This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with Sheriff's Report. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Ask the host a question, recommend a guest, or check out any of our other programs on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.